Hello, my name is Ahmed Hassan. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota and part of the Direct Track to Teaching program. Recently, I volunteered my time as part of a service learning requirement for the Direct Track to Teaching. I volunteered at North High School. I volunteered in an AP U.S. History class under the supervision of John Lockmart. A little bit about me first before we get into it, just so you kind of have an idea of my educational background. I grew up in Blaine, Minnesota, in a very suburban area. Our school diversity was very low, but it was still a public school. Typical of a lot of suburban areas here in the here in the metro area. So I wanted to come to North High School because I knew that the school had recently gone through a lot of changes. Though North High School has become very successful, but it wasn't a few years back. It was really kind of deemed a dropout factory, and parents didn't want their students going there, and the school was in danger of shutting down. What our main advisor told us, Adrian Bloomquist told us, was that what they did was they completely revamped the school. They began with a freshman class, and in every successive year they introduced a new class until that first class had gone, and that was back in 2011. Some of the changes that they made were that they made the class sizes a lot smaller. Another thing they did that made them very successful was that they added extra advisory periods and made students continue their education throughout high school with a single advisory. So every single year they would go back to their same advisory every single day, and it really built up the connection between students and teachers and got the teachers involved in the students' lives. It made students feel cared about and they wanted to succeed more. So after hearing all these great things about North High School, I had a couple of preconceptions coming in, a couple of expectations. For one, I still had the expectation in my mind that's very common about urban schools, that the students there can be kind of wild and hard to control. Why that is, we can get into it in a little bit later, but for now we'll leave it at that. My participation in the classroom relied heavily on just working individually with students during the one-on-one time. In AP US History, you write things called DBQs. These DBQs are basically just open responses to questions that will be on their AP test that they're tested on to get college credit. A lot of days we would write DBQs as practice, as they're seen as the harder part of the AP exam. And we were writing these, and I would just go around and help them with their AP US History DBQs, and thankfully I was put into a social studies classroom where I have a great area of knowledge, as it is my area of focus, and as I am going to be a social studies teacher, it was a valuable experience for me. Some of my original takeaways from North High School were that my expectations going in and now that I'm done are very different from each other. I expected that the students wouldn't be up to par, as silly as that sounds, as suburban schools, just based on what I'd heard growing up. But after going to school, I learned that these students are incredibly smart. I will admit that yes, they do get distracted a little bit easier than I've seen other students become distracted, but nonetheless, they're extremely smart, and it's very obvious in their work that they produce. I wanted to come to North High School because I wanted to see a different side of public education. What I wanted to go into is public education. Well, I know that charter schools or private schools can be great for some people. That is not the area that I want to teach in. I want to teach in the public sector because that's where I grew up, and I think that there's a lot of value in learning there because, one, for diversity purposes, and that's the main reason, honestly, because students in private or charter schools often don't get exposed to the type of diversity that you can get in public schools. I want to teach in those kind of environments to educate people more so about the kind of diversity that's out there in the world. And a lot of public schools are not representative of the diversity that we see in our lives. You see it all the time where people don't have bias against people of color, but they're very uneducated. They don't know what it's like to have African American classmates, what it's like to know their story, what it's like to learn how they grow up and their challenges and to be educated on them and to be informed citizens. I learned a lot from Mr. Lockmeyer in his classroom, a lot of what had to do with his teaching techniques. He really tried to employ a lot of different techniques that would help different types of learners learn. We had a week where all we did was an art project, and I saw visual learners thrive in a way that I hadn't seen them thrive before. You were just answering questions or writing short essays. We had practical experiments where people acted out a scene from a courtroom, and they learned what the legal process was like in that way of an African American who was going through the legal system in the late 1800s. I did have some wonderful, positive experiences at North High School. There was a particular moment that I remember that was very unsettling. As I was done with my volunteering for the day, and as I was leaving the school, there's a hallway that leads upstairs, a staircase that two boys were shouting in, and they were using very profane language that was not appropriate for a school setting. And I heard a boy start yelling louder at this boy, and then a fight ensued, and I was the only one there. I was the only one there, but as our policy for volunteers requires us to do, we are not allowed to do anything at all. We weren't allowed to touch the boys or pull them off of each other. We were supposed to get a security personnel hall monitor to handle the situation. And that's really all I did. I felt it within my power that I could have stopped this fight or held these boys back from each other, but I couldn't. It was a very different experience than anything I'd ever faced before, and it really made me question what would encourage these boys to do this. The environments couldn't improve after provided a picture of the classroom that I was teaching in, just so you can kind of get a picture of what I saw every day. It was originally built to be a science classroom, but instead it was being used for social studies purposes, which is fine, but that makes me question the allocation of funds into these schoolrooms. On the final day of my service learning, I asked John Lockmeyer, my advising teacher, what he thought about his time at North High School. He said he lived in North Minneapolis for 10 years, and I asked him what he would change about the school. He told me nothing. I asked him, have you ever wanted to teach anywhere else? He told me no. He told me that North High School was his home and that everything that happened in his classroom was just day to day. That's how it was. And this got me thinking about, from a teacher's perspective, what I personally want to deal with the kind of things that he had to deal with in his classroom. The disruptive behavior, the random shouting, the rude comments, the swearing. And I'm still today questioning whether or not that's something I want to do for the rest of my life. Teaching, without a doubt, is what I'm going to do. But in that type of environment, I'm still on edge about. It really makes me question, where do we go from here now? From what I've observed in North High School, these students may come from impoverished families, inner city. Most of them are African American, but how do we get them to be enthusiastic about their education, to want to come to school every day, to learn the things that the teacher is providing them with? And it's not an easy answer at all, and I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers, but I really do believe that it starts with their at-home life. It starts with making the community a better place for their parents to work and have jobs and provide for them, to where that will positively affect the students' attitudes toward the other parts of their lives. It's very hard when a student has to go to school until 3 o'clock, or go to work at 4 and go home at 10:30, and then come to school and do homework every single day. Me personally speaking, that was my exact situation, and I can talk from a first person point of view that it's not exactly easy. I love what North High School has done. I love what North High School has provided for students as a safe environment. I love the personal connection that the students feel with their teachers. That is something that I personally didn't feel with a lot of my teachers in my suburban high school. and I don't feel like a lot of my classmates that I graduated with felt that either. There's a strong sense of pride in North High School. People are proud to go there, no matter their circumstances, no matter what they've done. And again, going back to my interview with Mr. Lockmeyer, he told me, we have smart kids. People don't realize it, but our kids are just as smart as any of the other ones. The only difference is they're not always in the best situation to express their levels of intelligence. It's an interesting thought that they don't have the opportunity to showcase their intelligence, and that really brings me back to some of the main differences that we see between this public school, an urban public school, and then a suburban public school. It's the race factor, and it's the income of the parents. Those really are the two major differences that we see. We see that they both have smart kids, but we see that their diversity is different, and we see that parents have different poverty levels of income. Why does the level of income of a parent have to affect the education of the child? Why should that affect the level of them to showcase their intelligence and to make the most of themselves, especially in a public school district? Everything should be taken care of. They shouldn't have to worry about getting to school every day. They shouldn't have to worry about the food on their table. I believe that we really need to start breaking down the walls that separate suburban schools from urban schools. There's been instances in the past where, in the 1950s and 60s, where students were bused from urban to suburban areas to try to increase the diversity rates so people could have better access to education. But the problem with that was that suburban families and suburban students wouldn't want to go to inner city schools for the exact expectations that I had coming into this experience. I want to highlight again how wonderful of an experience it was working at North High School, and I appreciate the experience, and I cannot wait to implement some of my own ideas and some of my own thinking into my classroom someday. Thank you.